Procurement Institute for this very welcome invitation. So I heard that Trinidad and Tobago are in the process of moving towards decentralization of procurement. Well, my presentation is about an opposite phenomenon that is occurring right now in the European Union, which is a slow but steady switch towards centralization of procurement practices. And with that, you will see, I will try to argue, an increasing role for the use of ICT in procurement, what you know very well as e-procurement. And I argue, as you can see from the title, that this liaison is to be welcomed, but with caution. I'm an economist by training, and I was talking to a gentleman yesterday, and when he heard that, he said, "Oh, you always talk about theory." He's kind of right, but what I'm going to talk about today, unfortunately, is no theory. I was chairman of the National Procurement Agency, one of these big centralized units, for 3 years. And because of the damages that we did, we were shut down for 1 year. So, you know, this is no theory, this is true practice. Okay, here you go. This is the trend, this mushrooming that has been going on for the past 15 years of centralized units in all of Europe. Their organizations are rather different, while there is an average, a dominating trend of creating these centralized agencies within limited liability companies that have a good side of it, which is that they can hire public, let's call them public servants, at a higher salary, so they can attract procurement people from the private sector, which is not that easy to do within the public administration. Also, something else which is in common, not to all of these agencies, is the often not stated goal of reducing public expenditure for the acquisition of goods and services. And the other interesting thing is that this is a common project whether you're a center-left government or a center-right government. The idea is always there. In all these countries that have created these agencies for public procurement, let's call them from now on central purchasing bodies, to reduce public expenditure. Why would a left-wing government would like to do that? Because with that expenditure saving, they could use it more to increase social expenditure like pension or health. The right-wing parties usually see that favorably because with the savings in public expenditure, they can achieve their usually desired reduction in taxation. Now, this mushrooming has occurred well before changes in the directive in the European Union. But the European Union, when it came out, immediately gave a blessing to these two developments. Look at it. A blessing to central procurement bodies that centralize the purchases of goods and services on the one hand, asserting, as you can see, that they can help foster competition in the public market. The other is a switch towards the use of ICT in procurement, a switch towards e-procurement, again arguing that this could help in fostering competition, one of the principles of the Treaty of the European Union. What is actually interesting is that had you talked with the officials at the European Commission a couple of years before, they would have told you that they had a lot of doubts about these two things. They were seeing central procurement bodies as something that would hamper competition. They would see e-auctions, which have been mentioned this morning and which we will talk about, as something that could foster collusion. They changed their mind. Maybe they shouldn't have changed their mind so fast, as I will argue. But what I want to talk about now is, you see, once again, like this blossoming of central purchasing bodies, I forgot to say that the central purchasing bodies that you saw before all made very wide use of ICT instruments and were the ones in many cases to introduce e-procurement in the country. So again, and the European Commission together puts these two things together and introduces them in Europe, at least formally. Is this a random coincidence? I would argue it is not. We have a few data on this. There are some studies in the US. For example, this guy called Moon studied what made the states of the United States, not the federal government, more keen in introducing e-procurement. And he finds something interesting. He says, there where procurement is more centralized, you're bound to find more use of ICT, which in a sense makes a lot of sense. There, ICT, e-procurement is very expensive. You need to buy the structures, you need to have the people that know how to use it, you need the know-how. You would never launch an e-procurement if you were a very small administration. The cost would dwarf, that would destroy the benefits. So it's kind to be expected that you introduce e-procurement there where you have a centralized agency, and this is exactly what we're seeing. On the other hand, I would argue, this is not what Moon says, that without ICT, it would have been very hard to have some kind of very developed centralization. It is very hard without a portal, without emails, to come to know about the needs of all the public administration, to report to them, and to save a lot of money. True, you had centralization, if I understood correctly, since 1961, but centralization is certainly easier, much, much easier, if you can take advantage of ICT technology. So it's like the two things reinforce one another, they come together, ICT pushes centralization, centralization pushes ICT. Should we worry about that? What are the consequences of that? Let me talk a little bit about our program, the Italian program, which is sort of very similar to other programs that were launched in the late 90s. As you can see, it's a program of rationalization of public expenditure. So the goal was to buy value for money, for sure. Even though behind the scenes, governments really wanted this very big focus on reducing public expenditure. Remember, Europe at the time was creating a European monetary union. They had to reduce expenditure, bring down public deficit. What better way to do it? They thought that what easier way than to reduce expenditure for goods and services. They were so wrong. But at the time, it was understandable. That it seemed easier to cut that than pensions or health public expenditure. And once again, this program of rationalization was not done usually within the ministries, but was delegated to a central purchasing body that had the know-how of how to do aggregation of all these public contracts. And you can see that within the goals of the Italian law, for example, there was a mandate also to develop e-procurement instruments. Let me just say that these are the data that we have on many central procurement bodies in Europe. They seem to touch a very small percentage of total public expenditure on goods and services. Look at the body that I was chairing at the time, CONSIP, 1% of total. That's pretty small. But behind the scenes, something larger, you have to look at what the law says. For example, in Italy or in Austria, the law says that if you're not buying from this agency, then you have to buy anyway on your own at a lower price than this agency. So in a sense, these agencies become the base price for the whole public administration. So what they do can have a huge impact on all of the public administration of the country. Same thing for Austria, for example. How was the program set? Well, the Italian Minister of the Economy said we're going to have CONSIP, this central procurement body, do centralization, meaning CONSIP will publish a tender for computers, for example, a tender for a big amount of computers, 500,000 computers, which could be bought by all the public administrations in Italy. So if I am IBM or Compaq, I know that if I go into that tender, I will be able, if I win the contract, to service all public administrations. Now, mind you, without knowing exactly how many computers I would be able to sell.